Brian radio program. We have a guest, and we're very excited to speak with this man. He's sitting in the studio with us. His name is Geoff Emerick. He's written a book called Here, There, and Everywhere: My Life Recording the Music of the Beatles. And I just want to read a little foreword that Graham Nash wrote. He said, "From the very beginning, Geoff was an eyewitness to the phenomenon of the Beatles and the way they changed music forever. If you really want to know what happened, read this book. It provides a fabulous insight into this very special time." Welcome to the show, Geoff.
Well, thank you.
Probably the best place to start is at the beginning. How is it that you were in a position to be pulled in as the engineer to the Beatles?
Well, when I first started, I was working with the original engineer, which was Norman Smith, and I was sort of privy there to be there when they did Love Me Do for the first time as well.
Wow.
But as an observer, to get the ropes, learn the job. So I was with Norman on many of Norman's sessions, Billy J. Kramer and all those other things, and we had a good rapport. And Norman wanted to become a producer, and it was actually Norman, I think, that found the Pink Floyd. So Norman actually worked for EMI as a producer, and they needed a replacement. And I was really, really, really young, and I believe what happened with discussions with George Martin, realising that a lot of the engineers were, like middle-aged and stuff. They wanted someone new, and there was a lot of sort of arguments going on about me being so young, to go in and become an engineer. So anyway, when they realised that Norman was going to leave, I was promoted to an engineer, and I was like 19 years old.
Was it like learn by doing at that point, kind of, for you? Or did you know your way around a studio pretty well?
Oh, I knew my way because I was a mastering engineer prior to that. I'd sort of gone up to all the stages at a very young age, and so that's what happened.
Were the Beatles a thing on that first recording with you when you were in the studio with them? Were they just about to break, or had they?
No, that was their first recording session when I first experienced watching them. That was the second day that I started as a kid. Yeah.
Now, when you were brought in at the young age of 19, and there was a lot of discussion about whether you should or shouldn't, what were the Beatles' attitudes toward you?
Well, I'd worked with them on other songs as an assistant recording engineer.
Right, so they knew you.
Yeah, so they knew me. And I was really sort of obviously nervous. I wanted to vomit and all sorts of stuff. My stomach was churning over. And
sure.
I'd set up in the control room, and they came in, and they were in number 3 studio. And it was like a nod and a wink from Paul to George. But then I had George Harrison, because I had the mic open from the control room to the studio, and then George Harrison said to George Martin, "Well, where's Norman?" Not realising that I was going to take over as the engineer. So then there was a sort of a glum look, on the faces. So I think it had been discussed with Paul. But I don't think the others knew.
But you're this young kid, and you hear him say that. You must have just
I wanted to leave, right?
Oh my God!
Yeah. All right, now we'll bounce around a bit, but for you specifically, of course, George Martin was master crafting this whole thing,
right.
But you were the guy running the controls and the experimental out-of-the-box period with the Beatles, with Sgt. Pepper and some of these other things. How did you adapt to that? Because they were making requests of you to do things.
That's right, because what happened, when I won them over, when we were doing, the Revolver album when I first started, and it was that experience saying, well, where's Norman? John started to do Tomorrow Never Knows, which was then called Mark I as a working title. And he wanted his voice to sound like the Dalai Lama singing on a mountaintop 25 miles away. So what came to my saving grace was the fact that revolving Leslie speaker from the Hammond organ was revolving around in the studio, and I thought, well, if we can get his vocal into that revolving speaker, maybe we're onto something. Because all we had then was an 8 input mixing console, an echo chamber, and a stereo tape machine.
Wow.
So I was just grabbing at straws, and through the years, the only way I could sort of get what they wanted, which was all the new stuff, was just to abuse the equipment until there was like smoke coming out of it. That's all I could do. No, really.
Geoff, we're going to be bouncing around here all over from different eras of the Beatles, but when they walked in for the experimental type of things, were they prepared? Did they have ideas already, or did they just go, "Hey, let's try this"?
Not really. I mean, most working with them, most of the things were structured within the confines of the studio, and I had the luxury of time. Because I could be down in the studio, they'd be talking about the track, and I'd hear a snippet of what John might say to Paul, and he might say, it should be dark and misty and all the mysterious and stuff, and blah, blah, blah. So then in my mind, I would because I always see music and sound in visual pictures, so I'm sort of conjuring up this picture in my mind as what I think, he's sort of after. Because John had trouble expressing himself at times. So that's the way it used to work. So I thought, well, if I tried this and I did this, maybe that would conjure up something really different, you know. But it always was, if we're going to use a guitar from them or a piano, they'd say, oh, we don't want it to sound like a piano, we don't want it to sound like a guitar, you know. But I'm just stuck, you know.
Did you ever get a sense of who was the most dedicated?
Well, I guess looking back on it, when I was doing the book, looking back on it, John had like 95% of concentration, and he was willing to accept like 95%. But it was always Paul that wanted to go, you know, get that 110 or 101% to get it perfected.
Mm. You know, we've always heard the stories of obviously John and Paul, and John was relegated to 2 tracks an album. Basically.
Right.
But as we listen back, some of the classic tunes that we all love were George Harrison compositions.
Yeah.
Did you enjoy working with George on his tracks, and did you see him as a really smart guy?
No, it was hard, you know, because observing, you know, George, because in the book, you know, there's a sort of an underlying storyline of George's sort of, you know, the way George sort of built himself up to be the prolific songwriter and guitar player that he was, and, you know, experiencing, you know, things on the early sessions and Revolver and stuff, you know, when he was finding it a little hard to try and do some of the things that Paul and John sort of wanted of him, and then, you know, so it was, and I don't think he trusted me either. There was this thing with Liverpool being the northern part of England and us being down in the south, that we were completely a different race of people, and there was this little distrust thing going on, and he didn't really accept what I was really trying to do. And, you know, I got used to using Fairchild 660 limiter and stuff on his guitar and stuff, which really sort of made a good sound for that.
We're going to do business. When we come back, we're going to get into a couple of things. One, Geoff says that he did leave EMI in the middle of the White Album, and he says the reason he left was because of Ringo. Want to hear that? Also want to get into the Sgt. Pepper album, the preparation and all the stuff that went into that.
We'll also take your phone calls. We're sure you have many questions. Call 800-955-5567. We're speaking with Geoff Emerick, author of the book Here, There, and Everywhere, My Life Recording the Music of the Beatles. Welcome back to the Mark O'Brien radio program. We are speaking with Geoff Emerick. He's written a book, Here, There, and Everywhere, My Life Recording the Music of the Beatles. This guy is in the unique position of having been one of the very few people to work with the Beatles from the beginning.
Now, we'll skip ahead to the end. You left Apple, and you say here you left because of Ringo. Why is that?
That's basically because we'd built a recording studio in the Apple facility, which took about 2 years to build, and then we worked it for 2 years as a viable commercial venture. And Ringo wanted to get into film scoring and film work, and it meant stripping out the whole next floor above the studio, and we had to get rid of all our echo chambers and stuff, and it was just getting I mean, it sounds worse than it, you know, we say that Ringo was the reason, but it just got out of control. So that's one of the reasons why I sort of.
It also says here you honestly don't remember having one memorable conversation with Ringo.
With Ringo, no. I mean, again, looking back on it, Ringo used to drum. I mean, if anyone worked so hard in the studio, it was Ringo. I mean, he used to just drum and drum, because they'd come in with a song and they'd say, well, let's do it this way. And we'd spend like 5 hours, 6 hours with this rhythm pattern, and Ringo would be drumming and drumming and drumming and drumming. Then they'd change it completely, and he'd be drumming and drumming and drumming and drumming. And his drum booth was covered in wood chips from his sticks. And often we'd know that the session was over when Ringo stood up at 4 a.m. and grabbed his coat. And
was he a good drummer?
Oh, unbelievable.
Okay. Yeah. Let's get this out of the way now. In your memory, do you have a certain time or a certain recording session that the dissension in the ranks became apparent, and the tension with the group, and it just started falling apart?
Oh yeah, I mean, this all started on the White Album, and then it was the last thing I really lifted the fader up to record was the Obla Di Obla Da vocal.
Yeah.
And I think we'd attempted that 7 times. And Paul there was a way that Paul wanted to get a rhythm in his voice to sing that track, and this was the 7th time, and George Martin made a comment to him as a way of singing it, and Paul, with an expletive, told him to come down and sing it, you know, and I thought that's the end. I'm not, I'd never seen Paul get that angry, and this had been my leaving had been leading up to this when John made some nasty remarks and
the nasty remarks, and there's an F word in here, so I'll say effin'. He said Lennon called it. This is Obladi Oblada. He called it more of McCartney's granny music. Oh, it's an S word. Granny music S word. So he was not content with the way things were going.
Not at all. I mean, there's so much to talk about here, but it all started, from when they'd come back from India and we'd started to work on the White Album, and all the guitar amps went up loud in level, and everything was loud, aggressive, and angry. And
drugs?
No,
at that
I don't
point?
think so. And it was all the pressures of the company as well, of trying to run Apple as a viable business. I mean, everyone sort of blames Yoko for some of this, but that was only one little part of the breakup.
I was going to ask you about that. I mean, that's the Yoko broke up the Beatles.
No, I don't. In hindsight, looking back on that, it's a little tiny part of it, but it was everything that broke them up. They were trying to run a business. They'd been incarcerated in that studio for many months, and they were trying to run a business and make an album, and they were getting angry.
Who were you closest to?
I guess Paul. Yeah, I think because I think I always refer to Paul as the romantic and then John the aggressor, and it was that magic marriage of those two things that made those great.
Well, I thought it was very revealing what you said earlier about how Paul was like a 95, or John Lennon was a 95% guy. It's like, yes. That's good, that's good. It could be maybe a little better, but it was Paul that was 110%. He wanted to finish it and make it polished.
Absolutely, because we never used to do edits on some of those basic rhythm tracks. Then we wouldn't get to the end and 3 bars from the end screw up and then just do an edit piece. Occasionally, but very rarely, we'd go right back to the top and do another complete pass and get the whole thing in one take.
One of the interesting things with John, if you listen to John's music, he on one tune could be incredibly spiritually moving, and then on the next tune was some of the angriest lyrics I'd yet heard. What was the man like?
I don't know. I often observed John in the control room, and we'd be talking, and he'd be listening or whatever, and he'd go into another place. He'd suddenly look up and he'd stare, because he had those sort of round glasses, and he'd just stare. And it was only again after not realising at that time about his his childhood and his mother getting killed and so forth. I didn't really realise all that, and I've got a feeling when he's singing those really sort of great a lot of feeling lyrics, he's looking back in the past and remembering all that, and the anger stuff, well, that was to me him at present day time, the anger, but the romantic sort of side, or that nice side, was looking back into the past. And
did the angry side of him manifest itself physically? Was he an angry person in person?
No, not at all. No.
What about, and we've had this wonderful gentleman on this program, and obviously, rightfully so, he's referred to as the fifth Beatle. But talk a bit about the genius of George Martin.
Well, I mean, George's genius really came into being with all the great harmony work he used to do with them, when they were always stuck with the harmonies. And that I mean, towards the end, he was losing control, obviously, but I mean, originally it was that. And also an insight which uplifted Paul in a way, I guess, because, Paul realised there was something more than just going and doing rock and roll and stuff. But I know Paul was into all the Brandenburg concertos as well, and it's funny because I used to like all that as well, And
that's why one of the reasons you were close to him.
I guess so. I mean, we on our sessions, because we'd gotten to know each other so well, there wasn't very much said on our sessions. We could basically read each other's minds, and glances and looks summed it up for us,
Have you sent the book, or has Paul read the book?
I've got no idea. I saw him at the Grammys. I didn't ask. I never bring the subject up,
Do you, but you're still friends, or?
Oh yes, of course, yes.
All right, now Sgt. Pepper. Many would say that probably is their finest work. Talk about that, the preparation, the concept, recording it, what the mood was like with the Beatles while they were doing it, what pressure was on that album.
And how much you cringed when you saw the movie.
Which I worked on.
Oh, well, then you wouldn't cringe at all.
You talked about the Frampton thing.
The
Bee Gees.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. No, we did that. And anyway, well, this all started going back a little into the Revolver album. Yeah. We'd obviously done things on like Tomorrow Never Knows and things, and they tried to perform, not necessarily Tomorrow Never Knows, but some of the tracks off of the Revolver album live, and they couldn't do it. So we were sitting in the control room waiting to do the start of the Sgt. Pepper album, and John came in and he said, and he's looking to George Martin, and we're sitting there, and we thought they'd come in, all bubbly and happy and blah blah blah, and they came in with sort of semi-long faces. And John says to George, look, he said, we're fed up with making soft music for soft people, and he said, what we're going to do, we're going to make an album that's going to have sounds on it that no one's ever heard, and everyone looked at me. And I'm thinking, well, that's fine, but what have I got? I've still got my 8-input mixing console and a stereo machine and an echo chamber. But as I said, I used to have to abuse the equipment to get some of those sounds. So that was the concept. They were going to make an album, and then they also said to George, we're never going to go on tour again. So this album, we don't have to perform live, so we can do what we like. So that was, from the outset, the way we made that album. And even if we got the greatest sounds on things from one track, we'd never put those sounds onto the next track. Every track was different, the way it was mic'd, the piano from underneath, or we'd mic the floor, or we'd mic the walls, or anything to make anything different,
How long did it take to record the album?
Well, I logged the hours up from my recording sheets as only like 700 hours. I don't know what that works out.
That's a lot of time, isn't it?
I guess so. It was over the course of about 3 months, I think.
And that was in a row.
No. No, we never work weekends.
This is always fun. And you actually, in the book, talk about some mistakes during the recording, accidents and such. Could you bring some of those up?
Well, on Hey Jude is the good one, which is just before the third verse, when Paul actually says another expletive when he screws up a piano chord. There's been some dispute over as to whether it was Paul or not, but I'm sure it was Paul that said that. But
effing hell.
Yeah, that's right. Yes. Yeah.
Oh, effing hell.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Now, and what else?
The other thing was the foot squeak at the end of the piano chord on Day in the Life. Because I was gradually lifting the mic amps up as the piano was dying away, and it was almost on the point of feeding back from the control room to the studio, and then Ringo moved his foot and it squeaked, his shoe squeaked, and Paul sort of glared at him, and I just pulled the fader.
How much tension for you, though? Just can't screw up. You're moving mics away.
I know. I'm just lifting that lever. It was horrendous, and it was a great enter, the best track ever,
Now, there's been a lot of talk about the relationship of John and Paul, and that at the beginning it was a collaboration where they would write together. Right. And then it kind of became, even though it's always credited Lennon-McCartney, it became a thing where John would bring in his songs and Paul would bring in his songs, and that was what that was.
Right.
What was your bird's eye view of that relationship?
I was never really focused in on that. It was, to be honest with you, I still just remember, them each coming in with an almost finished song, and if they were stuck for a bit, then the other one would help out on it. I mean, that's the way I always focused.
And it was that way throughout the history until... Basically,
yeah, from what I remember. I mean, the White Album's not a nice period for me because of what was going on.
Right.
But that's the way I always remember it, yeah.
We're going to take some calls here and continue to do so next break as well. Let's go to Michael on line 1. Michael, go ahead.
Oh, man, thanks so much, you guys, for the show. And I'm such a Beatles fanatic. It's absolutely stupid, so thank you so much. And, Geoff, I just wanted to ask you, you guys were there at the beginning where you were more capturing, beautifully with microphones and preamps, the excellence of these musicians. And today I feel that engineers and producers more with Pro Tools sort of correct mistakes, and they have a bigger hand in the performance at the end, whether it's real or not, or auto-tune. And I just was wondering your take on that, because you guys, you created it,
Right. No, well, to this day, I mean, I was, as far as I'm concerned, that the performance has to come from the studio floor. We don't make it in the control room with plugins and software. All I can do is enhance that, and I had the luxury of time. And that's the way I used to build it up. As regards the Pro Tools situation, there's this whole side of recording music that is not being taught to kids. They just become Pro Tools operators, and we've got like 20,000 of them, and very few jobs. So this is like the artistic side of this job. I still try and work, to the analog stages as far as I can take it, and working with artists like Nellie Mackay, who I was working with recently. We did a version of Yellow Submarine, believe it or not, and I won't let her use an auto tune. She has to sing it in tune, and it makes a much better artist, for doing that.
You are a very pleasant individual. I was telling you this off the air. You're a happy guy, and I can only assume. And my partner and I have been in studio recording sessions where, in our tenure of doing this, where can sometimes be very tense just because of the energy in there. Someone in there is in a bad. Did you kind of find yourself being the rock, the come on guys, let's get happy, let's not take it there? Did you ever find yourself being that guy?
Well, I try to inject a form of fun into the sessions, because once they're not fun, they're not good sessions anymore. So they have to be they're serious in their own sense, but they have to be sort of light-hearted as well at the same time. But once you see that nasty thing begin to inject itself into a session, you know you're.
What do you do?
Yeah, exactly. What do you do? It's hard.
Have you ever just blown up during one of these sessions where you're yelling at?
No.
Okay.
No, nearly.
Sure.
And Paul knows. Probably the same. Not for that reason, but Paul knows I can. That's the way we were taught in those days. You know, you just don't. You know, you just bottle it up inside. You know, not many. You know, that's what you have to do.
We're speaking with Geoff Emerick. He engineered, for the most part, all of the Beatles music. He has a book called Here, There, and Everywhere, My Life Recording the Music of the Beatles. We're going to do business. We'll come back with more of your calls at 1-800-955-5567. It is the Mark and Brian radio program. Welcome back in. Mark and Brian radio program. We're speaking with Geoff Emerick, engineer to the Beatles. His book, Here, There, and Everywhere. One of the things I love, you talk about, George Martin had an assistant pull Sousa marches from the EMI library, make a copy, then cut it into hundreds of pieces, toss them in the air, and then splice them together to make the brass band portion on Yellow Submarine.
That's right. And basically, it was, you know, the thing was, let's put a brass band in there. Well, we couldn't get time to book a brass band, so we went up to the vaults to get a brass band thing. Well, because of the copyright thing, it was a Sousa march, so we chopped it up into little bits on 1/4-inch tape, threw it all up in the air, and it all fell to the floor. Picked all the bits up and stuck it all together again. And when we played it, I'd stuck it back all the correct way round. That's why it fades out on the last note, because of copyright, I think.
You hope you got it right when you put it back together, right?
Yeah.
Geoff Emerick, he's written a book, Here, There, and Everywhere, My Life Recording the Music of the Beatles. Let's take some phone calls. Kevin, you're on the air with Geoff Emerick.
Hi, Geoff. How's it going?
Oh, good.
Yeah, first of all, I just wanted to say it's a real pleasure talking to you, because your work with the Beatles must have been quite a ride
all
those years. But I have a really quick two-part question. I always thought George Harrison was a very amazing guitar player, not so much in a virtuoso, you know, like an Eric Clapton and Jeff Beck, but he created some really effective hooks that I think became a big part of a lot of the Beatles songs. And I'm curious if, from your perspective watching him, if he labored over these parts or if he came in with them prepared. And secondly, my second part of my question is, I found out in retrospect in later years that some of the solos that were pretty amazing, like on, say, Taxman, that was actually Paul playing that solo.
That's right, yeah.
And I'm curious if there was any kind of tension there or animosity, or how that sort of came about that Paul ended up doing that.
No, there was only a little bit of tension there. It was the fact that, you know, believe it or not, there's a budget to record this album, which George Martin's responsible for, and it was taking time. And in the end, George Harrison just said, let you know, he let Paul do it in the end. There was a little bit of tension. And of course, you know, George did come up with a lot of those licks, but you know, all I was saying is the fact that it was a nice observance throughout the book to see how George actually, you know, paved his way through life with and found his niche in Eastern music as well, which is just amazing.
What is the recording? If you play it backwards, what?
Backmasking?
Yeah. Wasn't there a Beatles song? If you played it backwards, it said. Was that? Did you have anything to do with that?
Yeah. No.
Were you with the whole Paul?
Yeah, that was the end of Pepper, wasn't it?
Yeah. And then it was like,
it was just gobbledygook. It was it was never meant to be what it was played backwards. I forgot what they said. It was like whatever it's.
Well, there's so many rumors and myths about the Beatles, and there's hidden messages.
Well, it's like the cranberry sauce thing as well.
Right.
You know, just cranberry sauce. It happened that particular time. It was Thanksgiving over here, and John was talking about, you know, turkeys and stuff and cranberry sauce and just.
I love this stuff. It's all gibbly-gook.
You're right.
Yeah. Bill on line 10. Bill,
I feel like recording some gibbly-gook today.
Bill, you're on the air. What's up?
Hey, morning, guys.
Hey.
And Geoff, what a pleasure it is to speak with you.
Thank you.
I had a question. You had mentioned earlier about how the tension really developed in the White Album.
Yes.
And when I watched Let It Be, and I still watch that today, it really, for the fans, it really became evident that a breakup was near.
Yeah.
What was that like for you sitting in the booth when they... Obviously, there was a lot of animosity and just tension. It was palpable. You could really feel it. What was that like for you?
Are you talking about the Let It Be album or in general?
The Let It Be album.
No, because I didn't do the Let It Be album because that was done in a film studio and part of it was done down in the Apple original studio.
You were saying that the White Album is when you kind of felt like...
but the White Album, you see, we just cut Hey Bulldog. And they were just had a great time doing that. They were doing actually it started as the video for Lady Madonna, and the next day or the day they were going to go to India, and they were just having great fun doing Hey Bulldog. And when they came back from India to start the White Album, when I first met up with them again, they were completely different people. They were angry and gaunt and miserable looking, and it was only, we weren't privy to what went on in India, but it was only things leaked out into the press over the next few weeks as to what was sort of going on over in India. And
they were hairier.
Pardon?
Weren't they hairier, like with the beards? And they
that's
came
right.
back
Yeah, absolutely. They were just completely different people.
But I don't understand because they were going over there as a spiritual thing.
But it didn't work out. Obviously,
tapped into something they shouldn't have.
That's right, and that's what happened. They went away just fun-loving, happy people, and came back these miserable people. And being an engineer, sometimes you get it in the neck, and when these things develop, you think it's your fault that it's not going well in the studio,
Right. When it really had nothing to do with that at all.
No, not at all.
No, we blame you for breaking up the Beatles.
All right, so since you weren't there for the Let It Be session, you weren't there for the rooftop concert, right?
No.
Because I'd love to hear the story. I had heard they had to do some sort of a concert, and just as a last resort, they just decided to put their equipment on the roof of the building and do it.
That's right. Well, they did, yeah.
Let's go to Justin. Justin, you're on the air with Geoff Emerick.
Hey, how you guys doing?
Good.
All right. Well, first of all, I'm a sound engineer in training. I must say that I'm impressed by some of the sounds I hear on like the Sgt. Peppers and stuff. The quality of the sound and the way that's put together, I just find magnificent. But I actually have a question about a specific song, Helter Skelter. Halfway through, when it goes, well, here she comes, and the guitar comes in. Well, is that loud? Was it meant to be louder than the rest of the song? Because like every time I have that on in my car and stuff, I have to turn it down because it's just almost it almost hurts my ears. I was wondering if that was on purpose or maybe it was overlooked or what's up with that.
No, Justin, that was obviously on purpose. I don't think I did Helter Skelter. I think, but you can appreciate by what you've just said how that anger was coming through that music. That guitar was supposed to be there in anger, as loud as that.
And Philip on line 3. Go ahead, Philip.
Good morning, guys. Hooty hoo.
Hooty hoo.
Hi.
Geoff, real pleasure to speak to you. On Maxwell's Silver Hammer, Paul makes a little chuckle.
Does he?
And I can't remember the lyric, but was that intentional?
Yes, I think I know the part you mean. Yes, it was intentional.
Are you heard? You're heard on a recording, aren't you? Take 2.
Take 2 of Revolution.
Did you go, that's my voice, cool,
no,
I'm
no,
on a Beatles album?
No,
I would have had to.
John actually corrected me because because we had to slate our tapes to ident, and when we were doing Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite, I slated it as Mr. Kite, and John was at the microphone. He said, Geoff, he said no, something like that. It's for Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite. That was one of those digs.
Probably when the Beatles broke up or started to because of you.
Well, if you want to read the entire story of what went on, luckily for you, there is a book. It's called Here, There, and Everywhere, My Life, recording the music of the Beatles.
Geoff, I asked you off the air, do people grab you by the sleeve, want to take you to somewhere, sit you down on the couch, and talk to you for 5 hours, and your answer was?
Yes.
Yes, they do. Absolutely, they do. And listen, you could talk hours about his experience with Beatles, but this guy has worked with some of the, he's worked with Robin Trower, Jeff Beck, Elvis Costello, Cheap Trick, Art Garfunkel, Little River Band, Burt Bacharach. The stories.
Yes, many.
You live here in town. Why don't you come back?
I will.
All right?
Yeah, sure.
Geoff, thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you for taking time.
Thank you. Great.